Hello everyone and welcome to your material for the second week of Unit 8. We're talking about controlled vocabularies in greater detail today. I again apologize that I can't be there in person. I'm in Vancouver for the the Association of Information Science and Technology annual meeting. So I will be back for class the following week, next week. I'll have the lecture here in 5 smaller chunks, so it's not one huge video. You have the slide document that has everything in it, but I have broken up the lecture into 5 parts so that it's a little bit more manageable and you can simply listen to each part and get through it that way. We will have some demonstrations today. At least we did in the face-to-face class. We demonstrated some of these controlled vocabularies and we actually went in and clicked around on some of the structures. I am recording this kind of on the fly here as I'm traveling, so I don't have the ability right at this moment to do the live demonstrations with the screen, but I did take some static screenshots so at least you can see what some of these tools look like. And when there are links available, please visit some of these tools and you can poke around in the structures yourself and do some searches and see how things are set up. There are 2 documents in Moodle under this week's content. They are an exercise. I did not do this in class with the other section, and I wasn't intending to do it in class. It's there for you to practice and see how well you're understanding how subject heading strings are formed, specifically in LCSH. There are 2 documents that you'll need for this. One is the section of LCSH that you use to do the exercise, and the other is the exercise itself. So you should see both of those in Moodle. In a day or 2, I will post the answers so you can kind of look at, what you did and compare and see how things worked out. So that's something for you to do on your own time, hopefully over the next couple days. So let's get started today and let's talk about a little bit more about thesauri. As we mentioned last week, there are several different kinds of controlled vocabularies, and the type that we're primarily concerned with today is the thesaurus. So we're going to talk about how you apply a thesaurus, and we'll look at some examples. Typically, a thesaurus provides authority control of topics and other types of terms needed, such as form or genre terms, and they're generally used in indexing services, in libraries, archives, museums, to describe resources, but also to help users from the other end to search through a database or a catalog. They contain related concepts arranged in a known order. This is usually, most often, alphabetical order, and they're structured so that the various relationships among terms are displayed clearly. So these are usually identified, not always, but usually identified by standard relationship indicators such as BT, NT, RT, use, and UF for use for. So broader terms, narrower terms, related terms, and then use and use for indications. And these relationships are employed reciprocally. So if you have a related term and it links to, you have a term and it links to another related term, whenever you list that related term, you also have to link back to the other term in the other direction. So that works for broader, narrower, related terms. Every time you have an unauthorized term and you say use this instead, you also have to have the authorized term and say use this for, and then you have the unauthorized term. So it goes in both directions. That's what I mean when I say that these relationships are indicated in a thesaurus reciprocally. They go in both directions. Now in general, a thesaurus is made up of single words and sometimes bound terms, short phrases that represent single concepts. Some thesauri, especially those known as subject heading lists, tend to include more phrases, more compound headings, and subject strings, which make for a more complex syndetic structure. And what is syndetic structure? It's the cross-references and the relationships between indexing terms, those things I was just talking about, the RTs, BTs, NTs, etc. Most thesauri focus on a single discipline or knowledge domain, but some subject heading lists attempt to cover the entire world of knowledge. Here is a list of some sample thesauri. These are ones you might encounter in indexing services or libraries, museums, and archives. And we're going to take a look at a couple of these today. The LIS thesaurus, Library and Information Science Abstracts, maybe we've already used it. The Art and Architecture thesaurus, and then a number of products from the Library of Congress, such as genre form terms for library and archival materials, and the demographic group terms. If you've done any research in education, you may have used the ERIC descriptors thesaurus, the Education Resources Information Center product, or something like the thesaurus of psychological index terms. These are just some samples. I would like to give you an example from one of these thesauri. You, as a librarian type person, as an information specialist, we may use a thesaurus from one side of the tool to assign language to a resource from that thesaurus. But users on the other side of the tool who, come to a system, they not only do they benefit indirectly from the thesaurus because of what it does for searching and retrieval, but they can sometimes access the thesaurus directly themselves and use it to form more precise searches. So if you look at some of these examples from Simmons' own library, we have access to these databases, you can see certain things in these databases. Sometimes you can actually access the thesaurus itself. So if we look at LISA, the Library and Information Science Abstracts, and you can do this if you go to Simmons' website, you can go to the library website and you can choose databases and then go to the L's. From L's, do the Library and Information Science source. Once you're in that database, you'll see across the top there, and I've circled it in red, there is the word thesaurus. If you click on the word thesaurus, then using that search box on the bottom where it says browse down there, not the big one on the top that says search, that would be actually looking through the database itself. But if you enter a term in that lower, smaller search box there where it says browse, you're actually searching through the thesaurus that is attached to that resource. You can see there it says browsing Library and Information Science source subject terms. So I did a search on metadata so that I could do that as a kind of an example for the class. I encourage you to do that on your own and see what terms are in there. It'll only have terms that are relevant to that database, so you're not going to find everything in there, but that's the whole point. They have a thesaurus that works for that particular collection. Now I want to talk a little bit about the Art and Architecture thesaurus as another example, and again, you can access the Art and Architecture thesaurus. It's free to access online, so I encourage you to go there and try it out. The AAT has a number of different vocabularies that can be searched, and you can use their terminology. You don't have to pay for, the right to use the terms or anything like that. So the AAT is a faceted thesaurus, and it's used mainly by museums and art libraries, archives, visual resource collections, and basically, any institution that describes art and architecture. We could use it at Simmons if we wanted to. It just depends on if you have a need for the type of terminology that's in there. The AAT began in the late 1970s. The initial vocabulary was gathered from terminology already being used in authority-controlled lists and in the literature of art and architectural history, and then they built off of that. By the early 1980s, after years of technical advice and financial support from the Getty. The Getty Trust actually took over the editorial responsibility for the Art and Architecture Thesaurus, and it now owns and operates the vocabulary. It was published in print form in 1990 for the first time, but that was discontinued in 1997, and now it's just online. It's completely searchable online, and you can license data files, if you want to do more with it too as well. So I hope you'll look that up and play around and see what's in there. Here's just some sample institutions that actually use the AAT. One obviously is the Getty Research Institute itself. This is located in Los Angeles. If you are ever out there, it's a fabulous place to visit. The museum is really amazing collection of artwork to begin with, but then they do have all of the research areas too. You can't just go into the research areas or anything like that, but it is really a neat place to see. It's in a beautiful location as well. The National Art Library of London, it uses AAT in their catalog, and it's working toward using it actually exclusively, but right now they still use some terms from LCSH as well. The Architecture Visual Resources Library at the University of California, Berkeley uses AAT in their slide collections, and Duke uses it for genre and form terms in their papyrus collection, which is kind of fascinating. This shows you a little bit of the structure of the AAT. It is composed of 8 facets, and within the facets, the concepts are hierarchically structured. So facets and hierarchies are the structural foundation of this particular vocabulary. Now within AAT, there may be multiple broader terms, so it's polyhierarchical. So things can be in more place than one. It has hierarchical equivalence and associative relationships. Those terms per se aren't used in the system, and you won't see the typical indicators of BT, NT, UF, etc. But that doesn't mean the relationships aren't there. They just do not use those indicators for them. The facets themselves are ordered from abstract ideas to concrete physical objects, and you can see a list of all of the facets there. There are 8 of them. The associated concepts facet at the top is dealing with things. In that box you can see some of the examples: emotion, imagination, air quality, just some samples. As we move down the list, again, things are going to go from more conceptual to more concrete. The next facet is physical attributes. This could include things like bluish gray, dryness, or thread count. Then comes the styles and periods facet, such as prehistoric, Samoan, or vintage. And then we have agents. And agents are, in general, living things. We have examples here of archers, assassins, health boards, lichens, tusks, and waterfowl. Activities facet is like it sounds. There are different activities in here. You can see that there are disciplines and functions and events, etc. Humanities, linguistics, milking, preaching, duels, picnics, studying, adultery, and basket making, for example. The materials facet deals with physical substances that are used in creation, such as could be things like eggs or foam or molasses or acetate, just as an example. And the objects facet is the largest of all the AAT facets. It covers either things that are fabricated or given form by human activity or produced by human endeavor. So we see some examples here of worry beads, aprons, pouches, cheese baskets, districts, graffiti, my favorite, and pelts, as in animal skins, I would assume. And then the last facet is called brand names. This was added rather recently, and this is here for materials or processes that do not have a generic name. So it can be found especially useful for those using particular products during preservation or repair, etc., and for which there is no generic term. We have some examples of Vaseline, Tupperware, and Hexlite. So that one was added more recently. This shows a little bit more of the structure. Within each facet, you'll find hierarchies of terms representing additional hierarchical levels. You'll find concepts, and you will find guide terms. Now, the upper level hierarchy and facet labels and guide terms are not used for indexing or cataloging. So let's explain a little bit more what those are. You can see the upper level hierarchy there is the objects facet, and guide terms are shown in brackets, and they serve as placeholder records to organize and give structure to the hierarchy. And they have those little carets on either side of them, so those are not used as actual indexing or cataloging. You can see in this example, guide terms are used to organize concepts into logical categories. You can look for coverings by general types, by specific types, or by components as shown in that example. You cannot assign guide terms to a resource. You can only assign the terms that fall under them, such as blankets, rugs, throws, etc. in this example. Now, this is an example of a record for a concept. A minimal record in the AAT is required to have a numeric ID, which you can see in the upper left, a term, and this term here is flowers, and a position in the hierarchy. So you can see that the record type in the upper right there, it says concept, so this is a concept record, and you can see a lot of information here related. You can see the note, that's sort of a scope note, and sometimes there are often notes in other languages as well to give more information. So you can see a list of terms which represent equivalence relationships. And so those terms, those are all equivalent, but only the one at the top of the terms section there, flowers, is the preferred term. You can see the word preferred is in bold. All the other terms are terms that will get you into the vocabulary, but they will lead you to that preferred term. And you can see there's many languages included. That preferred term is always going to be listed first. Following each term is a series of term flags, and they're enclosed in parentheses. Each one of those is clickable, and it opens up a little window explaining what it means. So if you click on the N, for example, this will tell you what it means, and that is a noun. So flowers here are being used as a noun. We could, in the English language, use flowers as a verb. So it's indicating that it is used here as a noun. The hierarchical position shows all of the broader terms, and if you click on the icon, the narrower terms. So you can see the broader terms in that upper thing where it says shows BTs. You can see flowers is at the bottom and all the broader terms above it. And then you can also click on that little hierarchy symbol that is inside of my little spinning flower or sun there. And because the AAT is polyhierarchical, terms can live in multiple places in the thesaurus, but only one location is preferred. Now the other locations are shown in the record as additional parents, like you see on the slide here. This shows the hierarchy of broader terms just like the preferred position does. You need to click on the hierarchy icon, that thing that looks like three little squares, in order to see the narrower terms. Related concepts represent relationships other than genus, species type relationships. In this example, there are terms that are derived or made from, that involve and are involved with this concept. And you can see all of that displayed there. And then if we were actually in the class, we would look at the AAT itself and we would, do a little search in there. Please, do that yourself. Look around in there and, open up a record and see what it looks like. Now, for a very long time, subjects in genre form have been tied together in subject heading lists. Terms like encyclopedias and dictionaries were mixed into what were lists of subject headings. And sometimes the vocabulary contained terms that could be used as either a subject or a form, such as something like periodicals. You can have works about them and works that are periodicals. But in the mid-2000s, the folks at Library of Congress decided there should be a separate vocabulary to address genre-informed terms. This vocabulary that they designed was made to supplement LCSH and other vocabularies. This project began in 2007 and it was published in pieces, the first part appearing in 2007. And this LC genre form terms, or the LCGFT, it's used to describe what a resource is, its form or its genre, rather than what it is about. So Library of Congress partnered with outside organizations to create this. And you can see indications of genre form terms in MARC records in the 655 fields. So here is an example of some areas, the areas currently included in the LCGTF, and then some specifics of what, a sample from each of those areas, basically. So you can look through this list and see, the areas on the left and then the examples on the right. But notice there is nothing here for ethnicity or nationality, for audience, for creation dates, for geography, creation or dates or geography or popularity. So, there may be an entry for poetry, but there will not be an entry for French poetry or medieval poetry. Okay, so we're really looking at the basics here. We're not adding to them. The structure of vocabulary in the LCGFT is similar to many other thesauri, using broader terms, narrower terms, related terms, used for, etc. But unlike LCSH, which can include pre-coordinated strings of terms, LCGFT focuses on single words and shorter bound phrases only. So this is an example here. This is an entry for historical drama in LCGFT. And here is the same term, but in LCSH. So you still need it in the subject headings for works about historical drama. But we see it on the left for things that are historical drama. So you can see the difference between these two listings here. With the success of the LCGFT, the Library of Congress continued to develop some additional thesauri, including one for medium of performance for musical works and one for demographic groups. So before LCGFT, all the terms for genre form lived in LCSH. Many of these terms also contain creator or audience information in them. For example, sailors' writings, Japanese. Now, that example contains more than one demographic aspect. You have a nationality, Japanese, and you have an occupation, sailors. You can see a couple more examples on my slide here. Children's poetry, that is including a demographic group of children, and it is including poetry as a form. Same thing with Swahili drama. There's two different facets basically to those descriptors. The Library of Congress demographic group terms, or LCDGT, is an attempt to start separating out some of these additional facets into other vocabularies. We will find these designated in MARC 385 or 386 fields. 385 is for audience characteristics, and 386 is for creator or contributor characteristics. So here is some examples of demographic groups and then some specifics on the right side. So you can have groups that are categorized by age, education level, ethnic or cultural groups, gender groups, language groups, etc. You can read through the list there, and then you can see some specifics from within each of those groups. Some terms may fit into more than one category. For example, the term boys belongs to both the gender and the age groups. This slide is showing you again another example like I did with the genre form terms. You can see the demographic group term tour guides shown on the left as it would appear in LCDGT. Tour guides qualified by the word persons, and you can see that the structure here is very similar to the subject heading for tour guides persons in LCSH. We have use for, and we have broader terms for both of them. There's some narrower terms for the LCSH version. And you'll also note there's a couple things, I didn't mention this in the last example list like this, but in LCSH there is that little phrase in parentheses, may SUBD GEOG. This stands for may subdivide geographically. So we're going to be talking about that in the next video, and that's all I have for the first one. Thank you.